Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We are going to get into the Deluge Part 3, History of Poland by Eastory, and then later this afternoon I have a little bit of a different video I'm going to do. It was one that was brought up on the Discord, and it seemed interesting to me, and so I want to do it later. It's a story related to 9/11 that I don't know how many people have heard of it or seen anything on it, and so I wanted to do it as something a little bit different and kind of off pace for what I've been doing on the channel. Also, tomorrow I will have the next Sabaton song that we're gonna do, and I also will be starting, I believe, the Great Northern War series. So another Sabaton song, the Great Northern War. That's what we'll be getting into on the channel over the next whole couple of days. But today will be the last part of the Deluge series and a 9/11 video that I wanted to get into. So with all that being said, let's hop into it.
It was a conflict which spanned a large area, led to unparalleled devastation, and featured an unlikely comeback story. That's right, the country is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the conflict is the Deluge. This is the third episode of the miniseries, so let's catch up with what has happened up to this point. In part 1, the Commonwealth had suffered a rebellion by its Cossack subjects and was subsequently invaded and occupied by Russia and Sweden. You can check out the video we made about it here. In the second part, many nations gathered together and with their help, the Commonwealth was able to defeat Sweden. And here is the video. By the start of this episode, the western part of the Commonwealth is free of foreign occupation and the Commonwealth is ready to move to the next phase of its comeback. For this, two things were necessary. First was to take back the lands lost to Russia and the Cossacks and to move its eastern border back to where it was at the start of the war. Second was the internal reform. Commonwealth had been occupied and devastated by its neighbors on a scale unseen before. While a lot of people claimed that it was just bad luck, a result of a series of unfortunate circumstances that was to blame, some, including the King of the Commonwealth, John Casimir, found the country's political system to be at fault for the events. As a solution, they proposed that some power should be taken away from the nobles and given to the king. This would have avoided many of the disastrous events that had taken place during the crisis and would prevent their recurrence.
Yeah, sure. And if you're the king, obviously this is a steal for you. You're basically looking at all of the nobles and being like, okay, so all of this stuff that led into this massive conflict and the devastation across Poland, me getting my crown taken from me, that's basically all on you guys. So here's what we're going to do. Because that was all on you guys, you all are going to give me the power that you normally have, and I'll just be the one mainstay at the top of this pyramid. Like, if you're the king, that sounds great.
These two tasks, reconquest and reform, would determine the Commonwealth's fate in the future. Russia and the Commonwealth had forces of comparable size, but Russia had to garrison the area it had captured and as a result its field armies were considerably weaker. Its only chance of successful defense was pulling them back near the fortresses. However, in Lithuania, the Russians did not learn in time the Commonwealth's offensive and the army was thoroughly defeated. With Russian army driven from the field, the Commonwealth's forces advanced far into Russian-controlled territory and established a defensive perimeter. In this way, many Russian garrisons found themselves cut off and in the next years were forced to surrender. In the south, the Russian army was also caught unprepared, but it managed to fortify itself in the rolling stock and the Cossacks were coming to its rescue. And indeed, soon the Cossack army arrived. But instead of fighting the Commonwealth's forces, they began to negotiate. They were unsatisfied with how they were being treated by Russia and proposed that if the Commonwealth would grant them the rights they wanted, they would rejoin it. The deal was made, and the lands up to the Dnieper River recognized the Commonwealth's authority. The Russian army was now surrounded by hostile territory and
yeah, that was devastating for Russia here. I mean, the advantages you have going your way if you're Russia is you have all of this territory and you have these garrisons throughout the territory, but the big thing is you're united and the Commonwealth is not, right? And so that's a huge advantage on your end. Well, as you can see, they've been kind of using the fact that the Commonwealth is not united continuously throughout this whole process. That backfired though, because the group that was the biggest thorn in their side was the Cossacks, and once they agreed to join back up, then you're really left in a bad spot if you're Russia.
And with no hope of a rescue, it surrendered. With a successful campaign under his belt, it was now time to concentrate on politics. John Casimir wanted to decrease the power of the nobility, but would he begin by taking away their estates, reduce their tax privileges, or lower their legal status? No. He would address the very foundation of their power, the royal election. So, how does it work? The previous king is dead, and it's time for election. The nobles gather near Warsaw, where different lords are presented as candidates. After a suitable candidate is chosen, he has to sign a contract with the Commonwealth, which limits his power and burdens him with several obligations. If he was not to sign it, there were plenty of others who would. This system favored the nobles greatly, and as more elections happened, the longer the list became. John Casimir wanted to make a small change to the system. Instead of electing his successor after his death, it should happen during his reign. The election would proceed as usual, the nobles would gather, the candidates would be presented, and the election campaigns would be launched. But at the same time, John Casimir would operate behind the scenes. He would use his reigning monarch power of appointment to offices, bribes, and coercion.
This is interesting. This is very interesting. What a intriguing way to go about this. Because I was thinking, just with the elections being held with him alive, they would be drastically different, because he still has power, and if you're being crazy during the election, or if you're putting crazy things out there, there can actually be like he could do something immediately, right? So if you're somebody that's putting crazy stuff out there, as a noble, you actually could get retribution immediately. It's not like there was this weird time where nobody's in power. There is still a monarch who has the power. But he's even going further than that, and really, really trying to swing the way that these things are going.
To influence the election and have his candidate chosen. At the same time, he could reduce the limits of future king's power. As a result, the authority of the monarchy would gradually expand. A vote was called for moving the election forward, and the nobles rejected it. John Casimir did nevertheless have considerable support. If he could secure the army on his side, he would be able to suppress his opponents with force and press through the changes anyway. To secure the army's loyalty, he planned to defeat Russia. Russia still controlled some fortresses in the Commonwealth's territory. John Casimir did not have the time to lay siege on them. He wanted to defeat Russia in a single campaign, forcing it to give back the lands. For this, he gathered a large army. He had the Crown Army and had retained an alliance with the Tatars. In addition, the liberated Lithuania formed another army, and the newly subjugated Cossacks yielded another. Altogether, he had a force of 70,000 men. The plan was to invade Russia, find their main army, crush them with superior forces, and make Russia sign peace and return the eastern territories. The Commonwealth's forces crossed the Dnieper, but Russia was aware of its previous defeats and did not dare to meet the Commonwealth's army in open battle. Its forces locked themselves in the fortresses, and its field armies stayed away from major engagements. The Commonwealth's troops advanced further, capturing and laying waste to large territory, and did a lot of damage to Russia, but they were not able to defeat its main armies and finish the war. The campaign ended, and the army returned back to the Commonwealth. John Casimir now had to choose whether to attempt to finish the reconquest with another campaign or to bring his forces back home to force through the reforms. He chose the latter. The latter, like the last thing I mentioned. Okay. This led to a civil war, which we will not look into, but it did not go well for John Casimir.
I mean, when you're looking at the options here, at least through the lens that he's looking at the options, if it's between invading Russia or having a civil war, historically, I mean, you'd probably have the civil war, right? I mean, civil wars are toss-ups. In fact, I don't know. I guess I would have to go through the whole list of them. But I would say the group that holds power kind of has an advantage going into the war already, right? If you invade Russia, the track record is not good. Not good. They had the little drawings a second ago of Hitler and Napoleon. It's just not a historically great game plan. Russia is where countries and empires go to die. So if it was me, I would take whatever other option there was other than take a massive army and go march into Russia.
He had to roll back the reforms. The chance to recover the eastern lands was lost too. While John Casimir was dealing with internal politics, the Cossacks in the Commonwealth's territory revolted again. Not being content with either the rule of the Commonwealth nor Russia, they now looked at the third major power in the region, the Ottoman Empire, and sought its protection. They were joined by the Tatars, and together they began raiding the Commonwealth. Unable to fight off two enemies at once, the Commonwealth made a truce with Russia, and the attempts to recover the eastern lands were abandoned. John Casimir was disappointed with the failures, abdicated the throne of the Commonwealth, and left the country. For several decades, the wars with the Tatars, Cossacks, and the Ottomans would continue, but the deluge, the invasion of the Commonwealth by Russia and Sweden, was over. So why is it that people in general don't know about the deluge? Although it had a lot of twists and turns and is a good lesson of politics and one of the greatest comeback stories, it really didn't change that much. While it could have been a learning experience and changed the direction of the Commonwealth's development, it remained a footnote in history. The flaws of the Commonwealth's political system remained in place. 30 years later, the Commonwealth's neighbors conspired to use the election to install their own candidate to the Commonwealth's throne. They failed to secure the majority of the votes, but as the election took place after the previous king's death, there was no strong government in the Commonwealth to enforce the election results. This allowed the foreign powers to bribe part of the nobles and use military force to put their candidate to the throne. Thus, for the next century, the Commonwealth's king was chosen not by its nobles, but by foreign powers. And these countries made sure that while they moved forward on the tax tree, the Commonwealth would have policies in place that slowed its development down to a crawl. As a result, during the following century, the military discrepancy of the Commonwealth and its neighbors gradually became very stark. So, one time, Prussia decided to use its superior army and annex part of the Commonwealth. Other powers did not want to miss out and joined in themselves. The Commonwealth now understood that its present political system would lead it to disaster and started the reforms John Casimir had originally envisioned. But it was 100 years too late, and the Commonwealth's military strength was too weak. Seeing that the Commonwealth might acquire a strong government and an army to reclaim the lands it had lost, the neighboring powers fully occupied and partitioned the country. With the Commonwealth gone, the political developments inside it were discontinued, and the future was shaped by the neighbors that had partitioned it. The Commonwealth didn't really have a role in shaping our present reality, and has become mostly a footnote. This was the story of the deluge. A footnote, of a footnote in history. And now let's take a moment to appreciate.
Okay, so that was the Deluge Part 3. I felt like that was a really good video. There was a lot of kind of interesting twists and turns in there. The later prospects of Poland is just, it's just rough, right? Once you have the major powers dictating the direction of the country, it's just really hard to get out from under that system, right? I mean, you basically are being dictated like you're a colony at that point, and it's just really hard to shift out from under that. But yeah, that was a really good one. Like I said, the 9/11 boat lift video will be later on this afternoon. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.